And turning now to that meeting happening Friday between President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. It is happening in Alaska on American soil. It's one of the most neutral and, more importantly, safe options for Putin. Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller is live for us in New York with some of the details. And Alex, why did this meeting need to happen in the U.S.?
Well, Andrew, Putin is seeking to evade arrest on war crimes charges. The Russian leader, he's got an outstanding arrest warrant by the International Criminal Court, also known as the ICC, and that means if he enters any of the 125 member nations, he could be arrested, and critically, the United States does not recognize the authority of the ICC. The warrant, issued in 2023, stems from charges Russians forcefully removed Ukrainian children, including from this orphanage in southern Ukraine. It centers largely on charges that he committed war crimes by transferring at least hundreds of children from occupied Ukrainian territory to Russia. The United States is one of a handful of nations who do not recognize the world's highest court, sitting with the likes of countries like Russia, China, India, Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. Every European and South American nation recognizes the court, as well as Australia.
So just because these countries aren't a member doesn't mean that the acts that their leadership commits can't come under the jurisdiction of the court. However, of course, it has an impact on the political functioning. This is a court that relies on state cooperation to be able to turn suspects over and to be able to carry out investigations, right? So it's always been an impediment to the court's work.
Putin's travel has been limited, as even an emergency landing could land him in prison. Putin did not go to South Africa 2 years ago as he was too afraid of arrest, and he avoided Brazil for another summit this summer. The trip from Moscow to Alaska enables him to avoid the airspace of any country who could conceivably arrest him. He will travel across Russia and over the North Pole and into the United States. Putin isn't the only leader staring down these issues. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant have arrest warrants over the current war in Gaza.
There are some leaders that, don't want this as a kind of a stain on their record, on the history, on the retelling of what their legacy is. And then there are others who could simply care less.
Other leaders with arrest warrants include Sudan's former president, accused of crimes against humanity, and a Ugandan warlord, Joseph Kony, infamous for conscripting child soldiers to commit war crimes.
And Alex, the U.S. does not recognize the International Criminal Court. How much of an impact does that have?
Well, look, it allows meetings to happen just like this one, and it puts Ukraine in a particularly difficult situation, not just because they're not included in this meeting, but because of these ICC charges. Ukraine is a member. They're the most recent member of the ICC, and one of those charges dealing with those alleged kidnapping of Ukrainian children is likely going to be a huge sticking point when these negotiations, if these negotiations ever happen. And so to see effectively the U.S. scoff at the ICC makes this a little bit more difficult. And when I spoke with this former ICC lawyer, she told me she believes this is really a low point for relations between the United States and the ICC. Even though the United States has never been part of it, she said it has always been supportive, at least to a degree, but she thinks that we're heading back to a pre-1945 era where countries resolve conflict with war instead of with diplomacy. But she pointed out that the U.S. has been supportive of certain situations, particularly recently, of the arrest warrant put out for President Putin. We've seen Republicans and Democrats alike supportive of it, but yet not supportive of other measures like the one against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And she points also to this low point where you've seen sanctions against the ICC judges. We've seen against the ICC chief prosecutor. And so really this points to a all-time low relationship between the United States and the ICC.
Yeah, and Alex, what are the chances that any of these leaders make it to a courtroom, particularly if they're not actually members?
Well, the reality is it's pretty unlikely that these people will see the inside of a courtroom. But as this ICC lawyer told me, it's not impossible. When you look specifically at the Philippines, there was a warrant out for President Duterte's arrest for years. Obviously, he wasn't going to turn himself in, and yet when the politics changed, he was turned over to the ICC. Now he's got a hearing in September looking at these charges, and so she said, you know, time will tell whether or not these people actually end up facing consequences. And there are nations that are not members that still could be facing issues. Looking at Iran, for example, they are not an ICC member, but some alleged crimes that are being looked into happened relating to other nations who are members. For example, if you remember that Ukrainian airliner that was shot out of the sky, it was a Ukrainian airliner, and so they're able to look at that crime through the Ukraine lens on it, even though Iran is not a member nation. Similarly, some war crimes that are alleged that happened in Syria, though Syria and Iran are not members of the ICC. Those crimes were allegedly completed in Jordan, which is a member, and that is how the ICC is trying to have a workaround with a lot of these non-member nations.
All right, Scripps News national correspondent Alex Miller for us in New York. Alex, thank you.